This is Ken Rohla. Hi, Ken.
Hi there.
Ken and I met in the Bosnian Pyramid Complex back in 2017.
I think even before that, because we really met on Facebook years ago when you were helping Sam Osmanagic with his PR and I think English translation and such. And you contacted me through Facebook. That's really how we originally met.
Right. And then we got to meet in person and just a short walk from Rovne Tunnel entrance. And that was fun. You got the energy up for that beautiful interview, and people can find that. It's called Blueprint for Existence, and it's on the YouTube channel Bosnian Pyramids. And you have to type that whole thing in because YouTube,
Oh, you mean the one we did when we were sitting there at the picnic table?
right?
Yeah. Well, probably by that time I had been in the pyramids and gotten healed up some.
Right. It is a wild story that you have to tell. The story of your life is an astonishing tale, like a tale told around a campfire. And it's like, a ghost story doesn't even compare to what this is. This is wild. This is
And
wild.
the funny thing, Jock, is if somebody came to me and told me that they had done the things that I've done in my life, I would have a really hard time believing them. And my first thought would be, is this person MK Ultra mind controlled? That would be my first thought. I'd have to vet them because it's so preposterous. So believe me, I understand if viewers have a hard time believing this, that's fine. Just tuck it in the back of your mind and, as we progress through the future, I think you're going to see more and more evidence of some of the things I'm talking about.
Well, let's ground everything in nature and in your garden. Now, you live on the East Coast and you have a beautiful sunny climate most of the time, and so you have this garden that's really unusual. Can you tell us about it?
Well, we're on 5 acres, about 3 miles from the beach, just south of Daytona Beach. And the growing season here actually is weird and it's harder to grow things than when I lived in North Carolina, say, or other parts of the US. Because being in Florida, you would think that, oh, you can grow food year round. But in reality, the summertime is too hot and humid to grow most crops. There are some greens you can grow and some herbs you can grow, but generally most stuff doesn't grow well, like, tomatoes or vegetables or whatever. They just don't grow in the summertime. It's too hot and humid. They just don't produce and they die. You can, control it a bit with a greenhouse with some shade cloth, but generally the summertime is not the growing season. It's the fall and the spring that is, or the growing season. And you can also grow certain things in the wintertime, cold weather vegetables, because we're in the wintertime between middle of December and middle of March, it can get down to freezing. And so it'll get cold. Usually it's in the 40s and 50s at night, but it can get down to freezing. And so you can, you're not going to be growing tomatoes in the middle of the wintertime. Although I say that, but actually I do, because I have some tricks for doing that. And so part of the tricks are growing in scalar fields, which are subtle energy fields that I have developed devices that put out these fields for various purposes, including, I really didn't develop it for plant growth, but that was just one of the side benefits. I originally developed a little small pocket device called the stress shield for EMF protection. And it puts out a pulsing scalar field of energy, about 15-foot radius, that protects you against EMF, but it also improves sleep. And I've discovered that that energy also can structure water homeopathically, and it can improve plant growth and have other benefits. And so that evolved into a larger device for sleep called the rest shield, which is a little pyramid device that you keep near your bed or where you work. And that protects against EMF, but it also slows brainwave states down and relaxes you and calms you down. And when you go to bed at night, it won't make you sleepy, but when you go to sleep, it'll pull you into the deepest brainwave state. So you get really good deep sleep. And then that evolved into a device for clearing nuclear fallout, actually from Fukushima. When the Fukushima nuclear disaster occurred, I had already worked with Chernobyl victims and helped several Chernobyl victims that were quadriplegics and paraplegics from the radioactivity poisoning their bodies, and help them to clear the radiation out of their bodies and heal themselves up and return to normal function. And so I knew what was headed our way when Fukushima occurred. And so I just went online to see if anybody, number one, if anybody had used a scalar weapon to cause the tsunami. that created the disaster, and discovered that, in fact, the United States had used scalar weapons to do exactly that. I saw the Minister of Finance of Japan being interviewed by Benjamin Fulford, and in that interview, the Minister of Finance said that the United States had used scalar weapons twice before to try to blackmail Japan out of policies that it was using, financial policies or economic policies with China, that was enabling the Chinese to drop the United States dollar as a world's reserve currency and use the Chinese renminbi as the world's reserve currency, which is the currency that countries use to do business amongst themselves. So there was this alliance of nations called the BRICS Alliance that's been attempting to migrate away from the US dollar to the Chinese renminbi for the world's reserve currency. And the United States has been fighting it behind the scenes, tooth and nail. This has been going on for 15, 20 years at least. And so
Deep state basically has a way to, they have an earthquake machine essentially that's scalar wave driven.
yeah, there are satellite technologies, and there are also ground-based towers that can also be put on these floating, like oil rig platforms that can be moved around.
Okay.
And yeah, and they can basically, what you do is bombard an area with scalar waves of certain frequencies that the Earth's crust will resonate with, and then it will make the Earth's crust shake and cause an earthquake.
They can be real specific because they're bouncing it off the ionosphere. Is that right? And it just comes straight down at an angle.
Yeah, exactly. And they don't necessarily have to bounce off the ionosphere, but they can. But wherever it comes down at, yeah, it's a very localized area. And
right.
you used to be able to see it sometimes when it was running on Google Maps, because it would distort the cloud formations around the towers, but Google now photoshops that out.
Because clouds would be like layered.
Well, what you would see around a tower is these rings, like these rings of where if there are clouds, you would see look like a wave when you drop a stone in water and the waves emanate outward. It would look like that in the clouds.
Wow.
And so Google started photoshopping that out years ago. So you don't see that anymore. But anyway, so they used this technology to create the Fukushima disaster. And so when I saw that, I thought, well, let's see if there's any military people out there or some agencies using scalar technology to counteract it. And in fact, there were people that were doing it, creating scalar devices to stop the chemtrailing. And when I saw that, I went, wow, these people, they didn't understand the technology and how it worked. And it just so happened that I had technology that could be applied to that. And so I spent about 1.5 years developing this small device about the size of a 2-gallon bucket that I called actually the original name of it was called the Sky Shield. And that became too obvious because, like I say, people tried to kill me over it. And so
wait, did you say people tried to kill you over this?
Oh yeah, because it interferes with weather warfare. The powers that be have used Tesla technology for decades, and also Wilhelm Reich's technology. Reich developed these devices called cloud busters that could balance the weather and clear pollution out of the atmosphere. And so the US government wound up jailing Reich and taking all of his technology and utilizing it for warfare. So between his work and Tesla's and other people's, the government has developed very sophisticated weather warfare technology where they can modify the weather willy-nilly however they want. And it's being used against the people, and it's also being used for warfare.
So you're saying that the scalar technology that good people have been developing to help humanity has been, that same scalar wave phenomenon has been able to be used by the deep state or the nefarious people behind the scenes against us. They can use this good energy against us somehow.
Exactly. It's like any kind of tool or energy, it can be used for good or bad depending on the frequency. It's like you can use lasers to heal, or you can use lasers to kill. It's the same thing with scalar technology. You can use frequencies like Rife machines, for example, are a form of scalar technology. And, they're renowned for doing amazing healing, or quantum biofeedback, another technology that's amazing for healing. There are a lot of scalar technologies out there for healing and protecting people. So, but there was nothing like this that I knew of that was out there protecting people against this weather warfare. And so I wound up developing that and put it out. And to my great amazement, it basically cleared a 75-mile radius of all air pollution, whether it was nuclear fallout or chemtrail pollutants or whatever. And it didn't drop it down on the ground, it sent it out into space. And so yeah, eventually the powers that be came after me, tried to kill me, and threatened me multiple times. And so I had to stop doing that. But
So you changed the name of the Sky Shield to Home Shield, and then did you stop producing the home shields?
well, we did. We don't have it on our website anymore. I'll put it to you that way.
Yeah, so you're being careful with your language, okay? Um, because your videos, you've done interviews, for instance, with the Journey to Truth guys, Tyler and Aaron, and your videos are some of the few that actually just get taken down immediately. YouTube will
Yeah,
not.
if you try posting this, I'm sure by now, if you try posting this on YouTube, it'll be taken down very quickly. Even if it just has my name in it, that's been my experience.
Well, you're the one who told me just a couple months ago that I should start a Rumble channel for my little podcast because you said that once I interview you, we're going to have problems on YouTube.
Yeah.
Like, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with having problems on YouTube. If it's just two guys talking and whatever you have to say, I think you should say it. And F YouTube so I'm going to be on Rumble and we're going to have you on Rumble.
Yeah, that's been my approach. I mean, I gave up on YouTube many years ago. Same thing with social media. People would try to message, even private messaging, my name or my website address in there, and they would block it. So yeah, the powers that be definitely have my number. They've been, it's like years ago, our credit card processors were freezing our account and almost bankrupted me multiple times. And I've had energy weapon attacks, and Google definitely shadow bans everything I do, so I'm having to play games to get around that. So yeah, it's
Well, I just searched for pyramid power, the video that originally turned me on to you and made me think I should tell Semir, the discoverer of the Bosnian pyramids, to have you come out to the complex back in the day, back in 2017. And today I searched pyramid power, and it is completely gone from YouTube. The only place it's even gone from your site, I think, because maybe
YouTube deleted it
from your site.
from my YouTube channel. Yeah.
But what about Fresh and Alive? I mean, it's gone from there too.
Well, it was posted from YouTube.
Oh, I see, I see, I
Yeah,
see.
it was a YouTube embedded video.
Got it. So the only place I can find it, the only place people can find it is, and just this is in quotes, search this, Ken Rohla talks pyramid power, and that's on BitChute. That's the only place on the entire internet.
Yeah, I think we have it in our BitChute channel. We might have it in our Rumble channel. And
Don't, because I searched it.
okay. Yeah, I'm gonna be coming out with a lot of new videos that are more advanced, I would say, with that kind of information in our private membership site at freshandalive.club. That's where I have to post now in a private membership.
Wait, it's Fresh and Alive Club, isn't it? Or it's Fresh and Alive?
We changed it recently. We moved to a new platform, so I mean, you can go to either to freshandaliveclub.com or freshandalive.club. They both go to the same place.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, so we started talking about the garden, and as always, there's so much to talk about. We went to Fukushima and chemtrail busting.
Well, it has to do with my gardening, though.
Tell us
We'll
about
get back
the
to the
garden.
garden.
Tell us
Yeah.
about the garden.
So anyway, because I developed that device for clearing these pollutants out of the atmosphere, it also puts out a large area scalar field that it turns out plants can feed directly off of. We discovered, because what scalar energy is superluminal light, which means it's light energy or photonic energy that's traveling millions of times faster than the conventional speed of light. And in some instances, it's instantaneous. And so because it's light, plants can feed off of it. And so we get, everything in my yard grows a lot faster than it used to before I put that thing out, which is good and bad, because for gardening, it's great, but I've got to mow my grass a lot more and I have to trim trees a lot more, which costs me a lot of money and time. But in my garden, the plants will feed off of that. And then I do things to enhance the growth, let's say unconventional things. Actually, it's it's really natural things that the earth does naturally, but we amp it up. And so normally bacterial action in soil will break minerals down into particles that the plants can uptake, those known as angstrom particles, where you've got just a few atoms per particle. Or in some cases, especially with volcanic soil, monoatomic particles, which means individual atoms of the elements. And those are extremely healing, regenerative to all living organisms. And when plants uptake them, it radically increases their growth because it's raising the superconductivity in the organism, whether it's an animal or a plant or whatever. And so that radically increases growth and health, and it heals DNA. It does all kinds of beneficial things. And so you get that naturally in volcanic soil, and that's why food grown in volcanic soil is so nutrient dense and so much healthier and bigger. So we do the same thing. We take rock powders that are volcanic, and we sprinkle them or mix them into the soil. And then we use beneficial microbes, probiotic microbes, that we will dilute and spray on the soil. And then those microbes will eat the volcanic rock and break them down into the angstrom and monoatomic particles. So the plants then can uptake large quantities of these, and then you get crazy growth. We get tomato plants 10 to 15 feet tall that fruit for 4 to 6 months. Everything we grow gets big. Celery we grow 30 inches to 3 feet tall. Cabbage is the size of basketballs. And it's not some chemical abomination. You're basically giving the plants more of what they would naturally get from the soil. And so you get extremely high nutrient levels. You get extremely healthy plants. They're very drought resistant and heat and cold resistant and pest resistant, et cetera, et cetera. And so I just harvested some daikon that we were growing this way. And actually, we weren't even using the monoatomic minerals, turns out. And we still got these gigantic daikon radishes because of growing in scalar fields. So when you do these things, they're very simple to do and very inexpensive also. But when you do that, you get massive nutrient dense food. And so I've been growing that way for many years, and I've been teaching people how to do that for many years.
Well, you've mentioned in other interviews that all life, all organisms, I just heard I don't know if you can hear the thunder coming through, so hopefully that won't interrupt our interview, but here in Texas. But all life, you've said, all organisms are essentially receiving and rebroadcasting scalar energy. And that's what our bodies, our material bodies, our seemingly solid bodies are really a field that's rebroadcast from the antenna of the DNA that are receiving the scalar information. So all life, this tree, you, me, we're already scalar wave generated organisms, but you're saying you're amping up the scalar wave power in your area.
Right. We're natural antennas. All living organisms are natural antennas for this energy. And this energy emanates from the centers of galaxies. And I kind of liken it to God consciousness. I really think that's what it is, whatever, however you think of God, because this energy has an intelligence behind it. And it's been demonstrated in physics experiments for many, many years, decades, like the double slit experiment, where sometimes light acts like a particle and sometimes like a wave, depending on what the observer is doing. So there are experiments that show that human consciousness can have effects on reality and on the nature of matter and energy. And so this God consciousness, this scalar energy, this superluminal light, it emanates from the centers of galaxies. We've been told at the centers of galaxies, you've got these giant black holes. But what that really is a giant superluminal sun. And so that sun is emanating this light, and it's coming out so fast that it appears invisible or black to our eyes and to our instruments. And so, scientists call it dark energy or dark matter, but what it really is superluminal light. And so at the center of every galaxy, you've got this giant sun emanating all of this energy outward. And the energy comes out in one end of this, it creates this donut-shaped field around it called a toroidal field. And so that energy, as it's coming out, it's spiraling and branching as it goes. And the galaxy itself has a toroidal shaped field around it. And so that energy emanates from the center and it comes out spiraling and branching. and ultimately it travels throughout the cosmos and around the toroidal field of the galaxy, and then it comes back in the other side. And so that's why, when scientists describe black holes, they talk about it sucking in all light and compressing all matter and light and energy and compressing it down to infinitely small. Well, it is doing that, but it's not exactly the way that mainstream science conceives of it. It's really this, like I said, this sun where the energy is coming out and spiraling around and ultimately coming back in. But while it's doing that, it's being relayed through all of the suns and the planets in the cosmos, because it's been discovered that all planets and suns have black holes at their centers, which are superluminal suns, and they act like these interdimensional portals for this energy. And so this energy is not like regular conventional light where it's traveling through space as a transverse wave. Conventional light, like when you turn on a flashlight, that's a conventional transverse wave, which just means that energy is spiraling out. We're told that light waves go up and down like in a sine wave. Well, they actually spiral. They don't just go up and down, they spiral. And when you look at it on an oscilloscope or something two-dimensionally, it looks like it's going up and down in a sine wave, but it's really a spiral.
Right.
And so as it's going away, conventional electromagnetic energy, as it's going away from its source, it gets broader and weaker as it goes away from the source. Whereas with scalar waves is kind of the opposite. It's like bizarro world energy, where when it comes out of the source, it's spiraling in these big circles and it folds in on itself like a tornado. And so it creates this vortex of energy that folds in on itself. And the apex of that vortex is some distance away. And so as it goes away from the source, it actually gets stronger because it's folding in on itself like a tornado. And so until it reaches the apex of that vortex, it just gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And so anyway, that energy is emanating from the centers of galaxies. It's relayed through all the suns and the planets, and it creates this cosmic web of scalar waves that's branching and fractaling everywhere. Fractaling is just a mathematical name for branching.
Yeah.
And it does it according to very specific mathematical formulas. And so that creates a geometry.
The Fibonacci series, right?
Well, the Fibonacci is one manifestation of it.
Okay.
Yeah, but because it's based on geometry, it creates geometry. Energy comes first, matter comes second. So consciousness comes first, physical matter comes second.
Right.
And so this energy, as it's coming out and spiraling around and being relayed through the cosmos, it's also slowing down and densifying or coagulating into the electromagnetic spectrum of energy and matter itself. And so the entire cosmos is holographic at its nature, composed of this light energy. And so when you, for example, look inside of atoms, what's called the Bohr model of the atom, BOHR, is what I was taught in school, is wrong. What you have, once you get down below the proton, neutron, and electron of the atom, you don't have smaller and smaller particles inside that nucleus. You don't have quarks and muons and leptons and gluons and muons and all that nonsense. Every time nuclear physicists discover a new property of the nucleus and of the atom they can't explain, they just make up a new imaginary particle that they have absolutely no evidence for whatsoever. It's nonsense. It's completely non-scientific. So you don't have these small and smaller particles. Once you get down below the proton and neutron and electron level, people like Nassim Haramein and others, some Nobel Prize winners, have shown that what you have are geometric patterns of light. And so it is this superluminal light, this scalar energy that's inside not just the nucleus of atoms, but it's in between all of the subatomic particles of matter, and it flows through it all, very much like the Force in Star Wars. This energy is flowing through all existence. It's flowing through all matter as if it's not even there, because it's flowing through the space in between subatomic particles, which is a huge amount of space. It's like if you blew up a helium atom to the size of a football field, the nucleus would be about the size of a golf ball, and the electron would be the size of a pea at the 100-yard line. And so it's mostly so-called empty space, but it's not empty. It's full of this scalar energy or this superluminal light. And that light energy slows down and coagulates into the proton, neutron, electron, and the physical structure that we know as matter and the electromagnetic spectrum. And so With gardening, if you understand that, you not only do you have regular sunlight coming down from the sun, but you also have scalar waves coming down from the sun and from other celestial bodies in the cosmos. And then you also have scalar energy coming up from the center of the Earth, because the Earth, like all planets, has a black hole at its center. And so you can capture that energy and do things with it, which is what a pyramid is. As you know very well from working with the Bosnian pyramids, pyramids are scalar wave antennas that capture this energy coming from the Earth and coming from the sun and the cosmos, and it rebroadcasts it in a toroidal field, just like a galaxy has a toroidal field, so does a sun, so does a planet, so does a human being, so does a cell, so does a molecule, so does an atom. So at every scale of the cosmos, from the subatomic to the galactic, you've got these structures that capture this God consciousness and create these toroidal fields, these donut-shaped fields, and emanate a field outwards. And the frequency of that field is dependent on that structure. And so you and I, as human beings and all living organisms, we have these toroidal fields around us. And you put the Jock frequency on yours, and I put the Ken frequency on mine. And so we're walking around emanating these scalar fields with different frequencies that make us unique. And when we come into proximity with another human being or another organism that is in the similar frequency range as us, we will resonate with that. And that's why people will naturally get along with certain people just from the beginning without really even getting to know them. It's because vibrationally they're in resonance.
Well, Dan Winter talks about the implosive nature of energy fields, and I think that this implosion might be the same thing that you're talking about when you say that there's this toroidal field that's being broadcast and it's coming back in and it's going out and it's coming back in and imploding in. And as it's
Exactly.
imploding, it's getting more energy. It's increasing its energy. Is that correct?
Well, what it's really doing is recycling. So it expands and it contracts. So you can think of it like the magnetic field around the Earth, which we've all seen diagrams of the magnetic field around the Earth, and it looks like a donut, right? And with these scalar fields, the same thing. It comes out one pole and is spiraling and branching as it goes. And eventually, it comes around the whole field and goes back in the other side. So yes, it's expanding, coming out, and then it's collapsing as it's going in and going back to what some physicists would call 0 point, which just means beyond physical reality. It's physicists, when they contemplate, quote, black holes or these toroidal scalar fields, they have a hard time comprehending anything outside of physical reality. But in fact, there are frequency ranges outside of physicality that would appear non-physical to us. And so this energy and matter, as it goes back in and is compressed, it's also going interdimensional. So it doesn't necessarily get crushed down infinitely small. There's actually evidence that it just phases out of 3D. For example, in tornadoes, there have been quite a few occasions, you can Google this and see this, where objects after a tornado or a hurricane will be embedded in each other. So some really flimsy object, like a blade of straw or a piece of wood or a stick or something, will be embedded in a tree trunk, or something very light and fragile is embedded in a block of stone or brick or a tree trunk or something like that. And of course, physicists can't figure it out, and they theorize that the force is so strong, it's shoving a straw through a tree, right? Which is so unscientific, it's ridiculous. What's really going on is when you get down in a toroid, when you get down into that vortex point, mathematically, if you look at the mathematics of a vortex, when it gets down to the very tip of that vortex, it's going from an infinite volume mathematically to an infinitely small volume, which basically 0. And when it hits that point, it doesn't crush down to nothing volumetrically, it shifts dimensions. And so what will happen in the case of these objects being embedded in each other, the toroid will make them go non-physical. So they'll phase shift out of 3D and become non-physical from our viewpoints. And then if they happen to be swirling around and intermingle with each other, and then they come out of the toroid and they solidify, that's how they get embedded in each other.
So they're
So
going like to fourth or fifth density or something like that, because we're in third
something, yeah.
density, or what? Or
Yeah, something outside of 3D.
okay, so it might only just be they go to fourth or fifth, or maybe
Yeah,
they,
I don't know. I don't know. Nobody's done any hard science on it to know
right.
that I know of,
Well,
but
speaking of hard science, I mean, Dan Winter is talking about charge collapse and implosive energy geometry, let's say. And I think you two would have an incredible conversation. I would love to hear you guys talk for
oh, we have Dan. I love Dan. I met Dan about 40 years ago,
okay.
and hadn't seen him for many, many years. And then maybe a year ago, we got on a Zoom meeting with a bunch of physicists and scientists, and
Wow.
discussed this stuff because these guys, I mean, these are all like Ivy leaguers and Oxford people and stuff,
Right.
and Dan and a few other folks, but it was mainly physicists, and they wanted to understand the physics of my technology.
Okay.
And so yeah, we talked about that.
Wow. I gotta find that. I gotta find that video. Maybe I'll insert a.
Oh, it's not, there's no video of it. It was too sensitive to be posting anywhere.
Oh, well, what we got to get you and Dan in a conversation somewhere, one of these days. But anyway, also, so not only is the one of the greatest scientists of our day, Dan Winter, corroborating what you're saying about this toroidal field and the power of this toroidal field, and the effects of it. There's also corroboration from Elena Danon's contact. There's two brothers, Jen Han and Thor Han. So those who know Elena, she's pretty well known in the as a contactee, and she channels various people out there. Thor Han is a he's in a spaceship right now. He's from the Pleiades. Genhan is in a sun building school on Era, which is a planet that orbits Taygeta. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce it, Taygeta. And Jen is telling through Thor and then through Elena is saying that exactly what you're saying, which is that the fundamental nature of the universe is a geometrical, energetic, that is frequential hologram.
Mhm. Yeah, and then here on Earth, we're in a hologram within a hologram because I was told by these reptilians I encountered that there's a technology on the moon that creates a holographic reality on Earth within the holographic universe to create a accelerated classroom on Earth. But it also is there to keep us kind of hoodwinked into this reality here on Earth to control us and manipulate us as well. But at the same time, it depends on you know, how you view it. At one level, the holographic technology is there to mind control the planet, the population of the planet, and to create a virtual reality where we are controlled and manipulated, but also in the bigger picture, that is part of a classroom, let's say, for souls to have accelerated growth and learning. And so it's not necessarily, it may have nefarious intentions behind it, but in the big picture, everything is as it should be.
Right.
So it's like we're just playing out these dramas, you know, to basically have soul growth and so anyway, it depends on your viewpoint on that. But I was told about that technology in 1995 by these reptilians I encountered.
Well, I think it's really key what Jen Han said through Thor Han, his brother, relaying it to Elena Denon, who related to us, which is that when he talks about the holographic universe, he's saying it's not like the holograms you have that are the light shows here on Earth, where it's fake. Like there's this fake image of somebody, and you're like, oh, it's just some party trick, and it's they're not really there. He's saying the universe is fundamentally frequential geometry, so that
Yeah.
each thing that we see, we call it a thing, I suppose, each manifestation, each planet, each sun, each uh, area of space, it's all geometrical, frequential. Um, it's a hologram of frequential geometry, and so it's all frequency, like you said, when it comes down to it, not particles bouncing around, but patterns. And
Right.
Alan Watts also talks about this. He says it's a dance. So there's this pattern that's the dance, and that dance is this oak tree. That's a
Exactly.
it's a dance of
Exactly. Why is a tree shaped the way it is? Why are our bodies, our lymph systems, our blood systems, our nervous systems, our brain, our DNA? Our DNA is a double helix fractal antenna, superconducting fractal antenna. Yeah, everything in the cosmos is shaped geometrically based on fractal mathematics.
wow. See that takes it to a new level because he didn't mention fractal when he talked about the geometry of the universe, but fractal mathematics. Okay, that brings us to another thing. Perfectly. It's a good segue. You've talked before about base 12 math. Can you tell us more about that?
When I was being schooled by these reptilians, see, it was this whole progression. My whole life, I've had this progression of contact. And when I was young, it was mostly in the dream state. Sometimes it was a physical, but I would be put into holographic, what were called, they called holographic inserts so that I wouldn't be afraid. So I wouldn't be seeing what was really going on. I would be seeing some representation that was non-threatening. And, and it just, to me, it just appeared to be a really vivid, colorful dream. So, that was leading up to physical contact. So for a couple of years in my 20s, well, really for many years in my 20s, I was having a lot of telepathic contact, but I didn't realize that I was just getting like these crazy ideas would come out of nowhere. And I just, I always wondered like, where the hell does this stuff come from? Because it's like I worked in a corporate job and I worked in this data center with, computers all around. And there was this restroom nearby. For some reason, that restroom was like a idea vortex, man. I would go in there to do my business and I would just get flooded with all this information, these downloads. I don't know what it was about that restroom. Maybe it was just because it was one of the few times when I wasn't focused on something externally. I definitely know that that is the case. That
Well, my restroom, like 15 feet from here, whenever I go in there, I calm down and I get ideas immediately. And I'm like, why didn't I think of that when I was at the computer? Maybe it's the EMFs are coming at me, but for some reason that bathroom is exactly the same way for me. So
yeah, I think part of it is just because I'm so engaged in 3D all the time that my mind, I'm focused on other things, right? So if something non-physical wants to come in and talk to me or communicate, I've got to slow down and stop focusing on the external. I remember sitting at this computer back in the old days when it had screensavers to protect the screens, and it was drawing fractals on the screen, and I got this download when I was looking at it. That's how the universe is structured, right? I was like, that's weird. Where did that come from? So anyway, regarding base 12 mathematics, so I had all of this leading up to, I was having telepathic communication with these beings that identify themselves as ETs, which I didn't believe. I just thought I was having a game with myself in my head. But it was interesting and it was just out of left field. So I thought, well, let's see where this goes. And so I was getting schooled on all kinds of stuff about physics and the nature of reality and how to be a human being and that kind of thing. And then when I wound up, and I guess during that time was when, no, I think it was after I had physical contact. But at any rate, after physical contact, I continued to get these telepathic downloads, except then it was more direct and there was more intent behind it because I didn't question that it was really ETs at that point. It's like after seeing these giant lizards in person, then I knew there was, they were real. So anyway, so I took the information in, and so with base 10, one of the things that they told me was that part of the way that we are enslaved here on Earth is that our math and our science and everything we've been taught, most of it's fundamentally wrong. And as far as mathematics goes, I was told we originally had 12 fingers and toes, that we had 6 fingers on each hand
right.
and 6 toes on each foot. And that we have been genetically modified by these reptilians in various ways so that we would not become more powerful than them. There's a whole huge long story behind this, but basically, according to them, we were brought here to mine gold for reptilians because they used gold to create monoatomic gold for a lot of different purposes. And while they have energy technologies where they can create gold, it's just a lot easier to have human beings harvest gold and mine it than it is to create it synthetically. It's kind of like you can grow meat in a lab now, but it's a lot cheaper and easier just to grow the animals and let them do the work, so to speak. Yeah. So that's kind of the reptilian philosophy too. It's like, why do something yourself when you can get a bacteria culture or a bunch of humans to do it for you? And so basically they brought us here. Well, they actually didn't bring us here. We had already been brought here in a proto-human form by other ETs long ago, but they took those proto-humans and genetically modified them to make them more intelligent and more adept at harvesting gold. And eventually the flock or the herd grew until it got so large that the reptilians that were coming here to maintain all of this couldn't maintain it by themselves. And so they gave some of the humans secret information and knowledge to manage the rest of the herd. And in exchange, they got more power and comfort and that kind of stuff. And so that evolved into the people that are controlling the planet now and manipulating the humans. And there's still massive ET involvement in that. So anyway, with base 10 and 12, during all of this, they told me that these reptilians had genetically modified us so that we wouldn't become more powerful than them and take them over, because the human form is very, very powerful. Our emotions are very, very powerful, and our psychic abilities are very, very powerful unless they're throttled and kept in check. And so they've done that through genetic modification and also through mind control. And part of the purpose of this holographic matrix here on Earth is to keep people living in a virtual reality that they don't know their own power and they can't escape it. And so part of that program to keep us limited so that we wouldn't become more powerful than the reptilians was modifying our fingers and toes so that we had 5 fingers and toes rather than 6. And that way we would develop base 10 mathematics rather than the base 12. And base 3, 6, 9, and 12, the geometry of the universe is based on base 3. Fundamentally, it's base 3 because when you look at the basic geometric forms that compose matter, it's two-dimensionally, it's the triangle and the square, and you add segments on it. But three-dimensionally, it's the tetrahedron, it's the cube, it's the octahedron, it's the hexagonal, whatever the name for the hexagonal cube. So you've got these Platonic solids that create the fundamental geometry of the cosmos. And it's all based on 3, 6, 9, and 12, which is why Tesla talked about the importance of 3, 6, 9, and 12. So our mathematics should be based on that. It should be based on the geometry of the cosmos, not on something else like base 10. And so by creating base 10 mathematics, we're forever locked into a mathematics that won't explain interdimensionality properly. It won't explain the cosmos properly. And so if we switch to base 6 or to base 12, then that unlocks a whole realm that we can figure out a lot more. And years ago when I met Dr. Patrick Flanagan was a brilliant, brilliant scientist who back in the 70s wrote the book Pyramid Power. Some people that are old enough may remember back in the day, the book Pyramid Power. It was a big international bestseller, kind of like Chariots of the Gods by Eric Van Daniken. And anyway, Pyramid Power, I read Pyramid Power in the 70s and I thought, wow, this is really cool. And I built a little pyramid in my kitchen and it showed that it would make fruit last longer and that kind of stuff. And that was the extent of it. I forgot about it, years later. And then maybe 8 or 10 years ago, Patrick Flanagan was revising Pyramid Power and updating it. He did that every few years. And his publicist somehow knew about me and asked me to write the foreword for Pyramid Power. And so I did, and I wound up getting to know Patrick because of that. And we became friends, although shortly, because he wound up dying a few years after that. But one of the things that he told me that I've never heard him talk about publicly was that he had worked in the secret space program, and part of his job was to reverse engineer extraterrestrial propulsion systems and other systems from ET craft. And he said in every instance, in all the craft that he worked on, that they had these cradles for navigation where the pilot would put their hand in this cradle and the navigation system for the craft were the biological organism that was the pilot, basically, that put the hand in the cradle. It was not, it didn't have any like mechanics or any computers or anything like that. The biological organism was the computer that navigated this ship through time and space. And I mean, multiple ships, not just one ship. And he said the cradle always had a space for either 3 fingers or 6 fingers. And then the reptilians that I encountered also, at the time when I encountered them physically, I wasn't counting their fingers and toes. And so, I missed that part. But then later somebody asked me about that. And so when I was having telepathic communication with them one time, I asked them, and they showed me a picture of their hand with 6 fingers. So that's where base 10 is designed to keep us limited and kind of, spinning in our wake, so to speak, and not expanding and really understanding, not ever becoming a galactic human being, let's put it that way, because if you're limited in that way, you just can't comprehend the cosmos. It's like an amoeba trying to understand a 57 Chevy that has no frame of reference to do so.
So you're saying that essentially, because the universe is branching, or as you say, fractal, like this oak tree is branching, and as every plant branches in this interesting Fibonacci series kind of way, with each branch coming out at this, you need 3, 6, 9, 12, base 12 math to really understand a tree or any other plant or the geometry of the universe. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and that geometry, you can think of that geometry, if you've ever seen a drawing of the so-called flower of life, which is a whole bunch of circles that intersect, and it creates this kind of like a spirograph looking drawing. That really is a representation of the fundamental structure of the cosmos, because what creates this geometry and what creates straight line geometry is fields of energy that are spherical. And when they clump together and they intersect, it creates that geometry. And
Right.
so if you look at the flower of life, it's a whole bunch of circles that are intersecting, right? But if you connect the intersection points, you get straight line geometry. And then you get the triangle or the tetrahedron and the square or the cube, et cetera, et cetera. So you get that all of that straight line geometry and the Platonic solids all come out of these circles intersecting, which are representing fields intersecting. So it's
Right.
three-dimensional. That flower of life drawing is just a two-dimensional representation of a three-dimensional shape.
100%. So you're saying there's these toroidal fields that, if we just look at the outline of them, they'd be a spherical shape. But inside that sphere is this toroidal energy zooming around and imploding and coming out, expanding and then imploding and coming out. Is that what you're saying?
It depends on the circumstances. Sometimes the fields aren't necessarily having that toroidal field with the energy. But I think the fundamental, from what I've been exposed to, the fundamental structures of everything are these little spherical fields that intersect and create the geometry. So you can think of it like if you go on YouTube and you search on cymatics experiment, cymatics, cymatics experiment, you'll see these experiments where people will take a sheet of metal and they sprinkle sand on it, and they put a tone generator up against the sheet metal and it vibrates. And as they dial through frequencies of sound, the sand will bounce around on the sheet metal in chaos until it hits a certain frequency, and then it'll lock into a geometric pattern. And then it'll dial through that into more chaos, and then you hit a certain frequency and it locks into a different geometric pattern. And as you increase the frequency, the complexity of the geometric patterns increase, right? And so it's the same kind of thing with the fundamental structure of the cosmos with this energetic. It's like the higher frequency range, the more of these spherical fields there will be intersecting, creating more and more complex geometry.
Wow.
And those will create different straight line geometry and also different patterns and different frequencies as well. So it's simple but complex at the same time.
Well, it's amazing that Alan Watts figured all this out in the 70s. I mean, he figured it out in a in a basic way, not as specifically as you did, but he did say that the universe is that when scientists try to find out what the basic stuff of the universe is, they couldn't really find it because it was all just patterns. There was no stuff. It was a dance of patterns. And so I just
That's
really
it.
appreciate Alan Watts, and then I appreciate you coming along, you and Dan Winter, and all these amazing scientists who are and because you are a scientist, you've done a lot of study in electrical engineering. You were a computer science employee of state-of-the-art facilities. You've mentioned in other interviews for many years, and so you have a legitimate scientific background. You're not just a guy spouting nonsense. But let's go toward, if you have time, I'd like to have you talk about what you know about monoatomic gold.
Well, when I encountered these reptilians and they were communicating with me telepathically before I met them physically, they went on for about a year and a half talking about gold. And they didn't say monoatomic, they just said gold, 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 blah, blah, blah. They're talking about gold all the time. And it was interesting. So I was like, as an engineer, I found it interesting, but it was like, why are they telling me about this? Now I understand why, because I think monoatomic gold and scalar energy are two fundamental keys to us healing ourselves in this planet on Earth and solving our problems. And so they went on about gold and how ETs use gold for time travel and dimension travel. And so I would ask them a lot of questions and about the nature of that and the nature of time. And one of the things they told me that I thought was kind of interesting is they said because we were physical beings that we couldn't really understand and comprehend time. They said our concept of time on Earth was a quaint local custom. And then later they schooled me more on that about how time is really a human perception or a perception of whatever organism. And it's also a frame of reference, because if you're in another planet, many light years away, and the planet is orbiting around two suns, and it's and depending on the size of the planet, the gravitation, and everything else, time is going to be different there. Not only the perception of time and the passage of time as a planet moves around its sun or suns, but also gravity distorts time and consciousness distorts time. And so there are a lot of things that can alter time. So time is not like this one thing that's operating at a particular rate. It's different throughout the cosmos. And so that makes it challenging for extraterrestrials, particularly ones that are not that advanced, to, let's say, meet up with somebody at a particular time and place in the cosmos. Because it's like if we had time travel and dimension travel capabilities and interstellar travel capabilities, and you say, okay, let's meet the Pleiadians for lunch on planet Timur at a certain time of day, right? Well, you're going to have to do it based on their frame reference, but then you got to figure out how to get there at that time and space based on your frame of reference. So it can get complicated.
Right.
So anyway, with the monoatomic gold, they told me that monoatomic gold, and I think gold in general, but they were talking about monoatomic gold. They use it in time travel, dimension travel, because it remains the same through different dimensions of time and space. And so there are certain elements that operate this way, and there are other ones that don't. And so this is how some ET craft are able to use really exotic materials that don't exist on Earth and can't exist on Earth because of our gravitational field and other influences here. Or I would say they can't be fabricated here on Earth. They may be able to exist here on Earth, but they can't be fabricated here on Earth. It's kind of like certain materials can only be created in a vacuum of space. They've discovered, working in the space stations and the, spacecraft. So anyway, so monoatomic gold is a superconductor. And what it is, for people not familiar, we're all familiar with gold and its form of being metallic and yellow and all that. But if you can use certain processes to break it down into individual atoms of gold. Normally, any element like that is going to have any metal in particular, especially metals, have extremely strong atomic bonds, and so the atoms are bound to each other very, very strongly. And the particles normally are thousands or tens of thousands of atoms per particle. So if you were to dissolve gold electrically using electrolysis, you'd still have, tens of thousands of particles, or excuse me, atoms per particle. But there are processes that you can run it through where you can break it up into individual atoms, and then it changes form radically. It becomes a white ceramic powder, and it has really weird properties. It's anti-gravitational, it's multidimensional, so it's existing simultaneously in different frequencies of time and space, and therefore it connects other frequencies or dimensions of time and space to 3D physicality. And so they are within our bodies and within all living organisms. We have these monoatomics, and they're loaded up in the pineal gland and in the brain neural pathways, and the DNA. The DNA is a superconducting fractal antenna, and it is not the genetic blueprint that we've been told it is. It's actually the carrier of the blueprint, because it turns out that the blueprint, the actual root blueprint of a living organism's genetics, is in the consciousness of the organism, or the biofield, as scientists call it nowadays, and it can't be destroyed. But the DNA is the antenna that picks it up and expresses it into the physical structures of the body. So the DNA is responsible for the genetic expression of that pattern in the consciousness. And so with genetic modification, you're altering that antenna so that it alters the frequencies, and then you get a different genetic expression. But if you feed the organism monoatomic gold, that will plug into the DNA and raise the superconductivity, and it will unwind and return back to the original heirloom, and then you'll get the true genetic expression. And so that's how you can heal genetic damage or other damage in the body simply by ingesting monoatomic gold in the proper forms, in natural forms that the body can handle. And then the DNA will unwind, and you'll see disease go away. You'll see all kinds of miraculous healing. Typically, the people become better looking, health problems go away, that kind of stuff, because you're allowing the true genetic expression of the consciousness of the organism to come through. So that's one of the things that you can use it for. You can feed it to plants, and this is what, how we get these crazy results that we get growing food, is that we feed monoatomic gold and other monoatomic minerals to our plants. We basically take ocean water and vortex it in a magnetic field, and that's one way that you can break the angstrom particles down into monoatomics, and then we feed that to our plants. And so you get this natural solution. We remove the sodium, and a simple way you can do this, by the way, is you can just buy the supplement concentrates, which is a liquid sea minerals. We sell it on our website at freshandalive.com, and it's like $25 for a bottle of this stuff. And you can take that and mix it into water and vortex it in a device called a water vitalizer, which will vortex that in a magnetic field, and that will break the minerals down and create angstrom and monoatomic particles. And then you can feed that water to plants, and you get this astronomical growth. But what I do with my plants outdoors, because we do it on a large scale, I used to make my own ormus precipitate, but now I just buy it because I've got a friend who makes mass quantities of it, and anybody can buy this stuff now. It's called Vancouver Island Ormus, and we sell it on freshandalive.com. But it's this liquid that this guy named Kevin Hay, who's a brilliant man up in Vancouver Island, Canada, he takes ocean water from a clear, pristine source, and he runs it through this alchemical process that creates this milky precipitate. And it's basically a silicate with concentrated amounts of monoatomics that are not liberated. And so you take that and you can feed it to your plants, and the microbial action in the soil, or in the case of hydroponics, you can mix in probiotics into the water, and the probiotics beneficial bacteria will break down the monoatomics and make them bioavailable for the plants. But however you do that, you can also foliar feed the plants with this stuff, and the plants will uptake it, and then you get astronomical growth and astronomical fruiting and astronomical nutrient levels. And so, years ago, I turned Dr. Joseph Mercola onto this. He's a friend and a neighbor of mine. And I've been trying to tell him for years about the importance of scalar energy and monoatomics, also known as ORMUS, which is an acronym for orbitally rearranged monoatomic elements. So I was telling Joe Mercola about this for years, and he just poo-pooed it and dismissed it until finally he went down to Hippocrates Health Institute in South Florida, and they teach about sprouting down there. So he came back and he was all gung-ho about sprouting, and I happened to be at his house, and he showed me his efforts at sprouting, and they were absolutely pathetic. I said, look, man, just do these 4 things, get the right soil, get one of my devices, my rest shell devices, soak your seeds in the ormus, and then feed it the ormus and grow it in air conditioning. And so he did that. Well, being Dr. Mercola, like 10 days later, I get a phone call from him, and he's like, what the hell is this? And I said, man, I've been trying to tell you for years, scalar energy, monoatomics, you got to learn about this stuff. And so he wound up being on the phone with me for about 4.5 hours. And he said, I haven't been this excited since I went from allopathic to naturopathic. He got all jazzed about it, and he started doing it. He had this McMansion on a river with all this, the usual fancy schmancy landscaping, and he ripped it all out and replaced it all with food. And now he's growing, 4-foot tall kale plants and cherry trees with, huge amounts of fruit, just all this stuff. And he's got some of my scalar devices now that help grow all this stuff.
Can you just explain, you said the Vancouver Island company, that you were saying that the monoatomics were not liberated. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's very difficult to really create monoatomic elements isolated unto themselves because they're very volatile, and if they get in sunlight will make them explode into light, and they just disappear, they phase shift. And they're also anti-gravitational, so they'll levitate. So you can do experiments, for example, with water, where you can take water and run it through something called an Ormus trap, which will concentrate the Ormus elements in it, and it's levitational. And you won't see this, but as the water's evaporating, these monoatomics are levitating up out of the water, right? But if you put that water in a freezer, you'll get all these stalagmites sticking up from it, because as the water freezes, it'll capture those monoatomics coming up, right? So anyway, they're very volatile, they're hard to contain. And so by making it in this alchemical form that Vancouver Island Ormus does, it creates this silicate that is like, the silica is like sand, basically, but it's in a kind of a pure form. And you need microbial action or vortexing in a magnetic field to liberate that into the monoatomics. And so by taking that silicate and mixing it with water and feeding it to plants, the microbial action in the soil will break them down, create the monoatomics, and then deliver them to the plants.
And that might be also not just microbial, but mycelial action, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Fungus mycelia, which are little hair-like roots, they also secrete chemistry that will break them down. And actually, that's how monoatomics and angstrom particles are created in soil. It's microbial action, yes, but it's also the fungus in the soil, which are a very, very important part of soil health, is having these fungus roots, mushrooms or whatever, growing throughout the soil. That's a good thing, because that secretes chemistry along with plant roots. Plant roots will secrete chemistry that will attract bacteria to that particular plant and break down the minerals that that particular plant needs. And it's the same thing with fungus mycelia. They will attract bacteria, and they will also exude chemistry that will break these minerals down into angstrom and monatomic particles. So yeah, that's a part of creating really healthy soil, is inoculating it with what's called mycorrhiza, which is breaking this stuff down along with the plant roots. So it aids the plant roots in delivering these nutrients to plants. And then, if you're like here in Florida, we're mostly sand. So even if you're breaking sand down, you're not going to have that many nutrients in there. And so that's why we use these volcanic rock powders like azomite or rhyolite or Jersey green sand or Redmond minerals or granite dust or whatever. I use a whole bunch of different ones, and then you put the bacteria down and the ormus down, and you'll get just insane growth.
And I guess it's important You've mentioned before that the monatomic gold is not liberated if it's in, for instance, a glass jar, right?
Well, it can be. I had an incident where I made a what's called an Ormus trap, which is basically a little, it looks like a little canister with legs on it. It's made out of PVC plumbing pipe. It's, in this case, it was a 4-inch diameter PVC plumbing pipe, and it has some magnets arranged on the outside of it. And basically, you hook it up to a garden hose, and you run water into it, and most of the water comes out of the bottom of it, but some of it, the magnetic field from the magnets, make it vortexes, while it's going through this device, and the magnets will separate the monoatomics from the water and levitate it up and then siphon it off. So you get this concentrated dose of Ormus water, and that water, it feels oily. It has really weird properties. And I filled up a mason jar one time with this, the first time I ever used it. And I just took my well water and, ran it through this device and then filled this mason jar up. And I was holding the mason jar in my hand, and I had two of my assistants there, and they didn't have any idea what was going on. And all of a sudden, within 30 seconds of filling that jar up, it shattered and drops to the ground. I was like, and I'm freaking out because I knew what happened, which they didn't. What was happening was the monoatomics in the water were trying to bind with the monoatomics in the glass. Because as it turns out, there was a physicist named Dr. John V. Milewski, who I interviewed, by the way, and fascinating interview. And one of the things that he showed was that these monoatomics are hiding within plain old sand and rocks. And so what's glass made of? It's made of sand, right? So you can take beach sand or bottle glass. He took pickle jars and Coke bottles and ground them up into a powder, and he put them in a magnetic crucible and microwaved them in an industrial microwave, and the glass melted, which normally it won't do. But when it's inside of a magnetic field and when it's being microwaved, the glass melted. And then he took it out and let it cool. And as it cooled down, actually, initially he did a controlled cooling down in the microwave, but then he pulled it out and it had started growing these little nodules of gold and platinum and rhodium and other platinum group metals, which are very common in these monoatomic, in the monoatomic mineral realm. And then the interesting thing was, though, over time, over months, those nodules would continue to grow like crystals. And so he showed that these monoatomic elements are hiding within other elements, particularly silica. And so monoatomic gold can be extracted out of silica if you know how to do it.
And so glass is made of the silica, right? The sand, right? So you're saying that the glass, the monatomics in the glass were being, that the monatomic gold in your solution was trying to bind or was binding with this monatomics in the glass, right?
Right. And it would break the atomic bonds and then the glass shatters.
And it breaks the atomic bonds that are previously set up. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I take cacao from Peru, and I guess that in certain places the monatomic elements in the soil are higher, and I'm assuming that the cacao trees, the cacao made from the soil in Peru has high monatomic elements. Because whenever I take this, I feel connected as a writer. For instance, I can write for 2 hours on a couple teaspoons of this cacao, and it's a seamless writing. It's not like I'm thinking what should the next word be. It's coming to me, and then after a couple hours, I start to falter and I go, wait, what's the next word? What should this character say? And then I go, oh, I need some more cacao. So is that true that there's monatomic elements in the Peruvian cacao and the South American soil?
Yeah, if it's grown in volcanic soil, cacao will have monoatomics in it, and particularly monoatomic gold. But of course, there's also a couple other things going on. It has theobromide, which is a stimulant, and it will dilate the blood vessels in the brain, which will bring more oxygen in and help you think better as well. So there's several things going on. I'll tell you a story about cacao. So years ago, I heard David Wolf, he was talking about cacao all the time, and I would go to some of his events and go to his all-night chocolate parties where they would be giving out chocolate and everybody would get high on chocolate and be up all night having a good old time. It was fantastic. But one of the things I learned after eating about I don't know, 40 pounds of cacao over a few years, was that it definitely also stresses the endocrine glands. And so I wound up exhausting my adrenaline glands and endocrine glands by eating so much cacao. And so I had to lay off of it. But before I did all that, I heard David talking about cacao. I was like, oh, I'm not going back on that train, because I used to be a computer geek and, working in a corporate data center, and I would eat out of vending machines for breakfast. I would have 2 Kit Kats and a Coke for breakfast. This is how schooled I was on health and diet. And so I didn't know anything about it, right? So I got off all of that. I got off sugar. I got off chocolate. I was like, there's no way I'm getting re-addicted to that. So David would be talking about cacao. I was like, no, not going there. Until I was listening to him being interviewed, and he said, cacao is high in monoatomic gold. I'm like, what? So I immediately went online and I ordered a pound of cacao nibs from him, and they wound up arriving on a Friday afternoon. And so I was working, and when they showed up, I couldn't wait. So I got the cacao nibs, and he said in the interview, he goes, people ask me what I eat. This is what I eat. So I'm envisioning him sitting around eating bowls of cacao, So I measured up 2 cups of cacao nibs, and I mixed them into a bowl with some coconut and I think some stevia or something, right? And I sat and ate it in about 10 minutes. 2 cups of cacao, massive stimulant, right? I mean, there's a boatload of caffeine, and more specifically, it's really theobromide, but it's a caffeine analog. And man, I'm gonna tell you, it lit me up. It was a religious experience. All of a sudden, it's like my brain switched on, and I was seeing like vistas of the future, and like I could see patterns of things in mathematics and the stucco on the wall. I mean, it was crazy. It was kind of like in the Matrix, where you see through the Matrix. and I was so excited. After like a half an hour of this, I was just tripping. And so I called up one of my neighbors who was into natural health, and I said, oh my God, you got to come over and do some cacao.
Yeah.
So she comes over with a friend of hers who was a psychic, as it turns out, and she was a coffee drinker. And so she sees how lit up I was. And I said, like, you got to do some cacao, and I was like, so she did a quarter cup. She took a quarter cup of the nibs and mixed it with some, and she ate it. And she didn't feel that much because number one, she was a coffee drinker, so she was used to caffeine. I was not. I was very sensitive to caffeine. And the psychic lady was there. I invited her to have some. She's like, no. She was looking at me like, I don't know what the hell's going on with your field, but I don't want any of that. So it was amazing. And I wound up driving while I was high off of cacao. And it was just like, I mean, it's like I was having visions and just seeing different scenarios of the future and how to solve all kinds of problems. And it was crazy. So yeah, it will, it's a combination of it, the monoatomic gold raising the superconductivity in the brain, and then the cacao, the theobromide dilating the blood vessels and bringing in more oxygen to the brain, and who knows what else. But yeah, it was quite an experience.
Yeah, I have a friend in California, and she started a company called Lover Organic Chocolate. And I'm going to have her on and just to talk about cacao for 2 hours, and that's going to be soon. And she has this. She's from Australia, so she has this beautiful. I absolutely
I
love
love
it.
Australians.
Isn't it amazing? I mean, it's like
Yeah.
it's just music to my ears, the Australian accent. But
Yeah.
anyway, I'm excited to talk to her about cacao, and I'm glad that you have this great story to tell. And I'm always telling people, that if they want to connect to, I call it the muse. I don't know what it really is, but whatever it is, that I'm connecting to something that's helping me do my job as a writer. And I don't know exactly what is going on as a writer, even in the first place. Like, is imagination tapping into something real? Are there stories out there that we're just downloading, or is imagination something that's just coming up with our own little we're putting pieces of a puzzle together on our own? I don't know really what it is, but
Well, I would say, based on my experience and what I'm aware of, my impression is what people call imagination is a combination of things. It can be channeling for sure, and I think we all do this all the time, where there's there's stuff out there in what physicists would call the quantum field. Some people call it the Akashic records, but it's like when you understand that there is no past and future and present, time is all simultaneous. Everything's out there existing, and there are multiple timelines or whatever. We're navigating with our consciousness through these so-called timelines, which is just a perception. So everything is already out there. All possibilities are already out there. And when we're imagining things or, creating something new, we're pulling stuff in from different places. And it's based on our experience in the here and now, in this lifetime, our experiences up to this point, and everything the knowledge and experiences we've accumulated. It's also, I think, dependent on those experiences we've accumulated in other lifetimes, because I've done a lot of past life work, and I don't really call them past lives. It's really simultaneous lives, because they're out there. Those other us's are out there, whether it's past or future. I was shown one time by these reptilians in an energy exercise, my future selves, and some of them weren't human, which blew my mind because I never considered I might not be human, right? So I think we draw upon those experiences, and then also we can tap into other people's knowledge and experience here, and just in here in physicality, it's like we can tap into the teachings of other people. We can tap into other teachings of non-physicals, our guides, God, whatever is out there. There are different sources emanating information. And so I think it's all of that. I think we're pulling all of this stuff in, depending on what we're doing and what we're working on. I've had instances, for example, where, and this is something that occurs to me commonly, where I can be driving down the road in my car and I can look over at somebody on the side of the road and I get pulled into their life and I can experience their life for a few seconds. It's like I can see where they live and what their family looks like and how they're feeling and all this crazy stuff. And I've never done any kind of scientific validation to see if that's true or not, but I have had plenty of experiences where I, like I can read people, and when I'm interacting with people, and then I find out later that what I was picking up, is confirmed. So we all have those abilities, some people would call them psychic abilities or whatever, but so this, what we call imagination, is coming from a lot of different places.
Can you tell us more specifically about how ET races use monoatomic gold to help them travel through dimensions?
Okay. And humans too, here on Earth, because I've met 6 different people that worked on propulsion systems for the military and the secret space programs. And they've told me, they've shared with me how it works. So there are different ways of doing it, but basically it turns out if you open up a black hole, inside of a black hole, there's no mass, there's no inertia, there's no drag, there's no momentum. And so you're kind of in this no man's land where like radioactivity can't exist inside of a black hole. And I know this because years ago, I worked with some people who had worked on interstellar space travel technology and time travel technology for the US military. And then in 2013, I met Russell Anderson, who was the CEO of Searle Magnetics at that time. And I knew Searle's technology very well. Searle was an Oxford University professor who developed a free energy technology based on magnets, where he made these very special magnets and he put them in concentric rings in these like guides so that they would spin around in these concentric rings of magnets. They would spin around and each ring would spin in the opposite direction of the one next to it. And what that would do was it would create free energy, but it also would open up a black hole. Through very serendipitous events, Russell and I were both speaking at a conference. I was not scheduled to speak at that conference. I was like a last minute addition because somebody dropped out and they asked me to speak. So my name was nowhere on anywhere at this event. And so I did a presentation on clearing chemtrails and nuclear fallout. The organizers were in the presentation and they were just blown away. So they invited me to speak at this speakers panel that evening. So I got to the room early and the only person in the room was Russell Anderson. He was already up on stage. So I sat down next to him, got to talking to him. And he told me about Searle Magnetics and said that not only had they developed free energy, but they had developed 44 anti-gravity time traveling flying saucers for the US military. And he pulls out his cell phone and starts showing me pictures. and the flying saucers that they had built, and they were, above ground and all kinds of stuff floating around. And he said that some of them were famous UFO pictures, by the way. He's like, yeah, that's ours. And so he explained to me how theirs worked, and this is very, very typical of how extraterrestrial craft also work. If they're at the level where they need a craft. Now, these reptilians that I encountered actually were so advanced, they don't even need craft. They can use their consciousness to go wherever. They can just show up wherever in the cosmos. But if they're a race that hasn't gotten that far developed, basically, if you can either do this with vortexing mercury, what they call red mercury, which is I think it's a diatomic or monatomic form of mercury. It must be diatomic, but anyway, you can vortex mercury and it will create a black hole, or you can do magnets and it'll vortex it and it'll open a black hole. You can also create coils of certain shapes that are toroidal, and you pulse the energy through them in a certain way and it creates resonance, and that will open up a black hole. So there are multiple ways of doing this.
And a black hole, another word for it could be the singularity that you talked about. It's so that, because black hole might sort of have a negative connotation from academia, so we have to fear the black hole. It's going to suck in the entire universe and everything's going to die. So maybe we call it a singularity. Is that possible?
Singularity or interdimensional portal really is what it is. And by the way, your body's full of black holes. At every scale of the cosmos, you've got black holes, and what are called the acupuncture meridians in the body, those are actually deposits of these monoatomic minerals which create superconductivity, and that creates a little black hole. The chakras along the spine are just larger deposits of these monoatomics that create a larger nodule of superconductivity, which creates an interdimensional portal there. And so if you look at how the chakras are represented, they're represented as different colors, and they're spiraling wheels of color, right? Well, it's because the brain is a transceiver. It's like a radio that captures this God consciousness from the cosmos and the earth, and it rebroadcasts it, but it also sends it down the spine. The spine and the nervous system are the antenna for that receiver. And that is a fractal antenna that creates the toroidal field around, the person. All along the nervous system and the spine, those superconducting deposits are there, and the chakras are these larger deposits, so that when the energy is received by the brain, as it comes down the spine, the frequency changes the farther it goes down along the spine, and then it comes out on these nodules of monoatomics and creates that vortex. And so that's what a chakra is. It's a scalar vortex coming off the spine. And then every single meridian in the body does the same thing. And it's not just coming out of the front, it goes out the front and the back. So it's the energy is coming out of the front and going around the toroidal field and then coming back in the back.
So acupuncture is just releasing some kind of blockage of that vortex that's coming out.
Exactly. It's mechanically opening up something that has blocked the superconductivity in that deposit in the meridian. And so if you're, you can get acupuncture and open it up and then things get better. But then if you're, eating McDonald's double cheeseburgers or whatever and doing the things that got it clogged up in the first place, it's going to get clogged up again unless you change what you're doing. And then if you're really smart and you do things that open it up and keep it open up and raise the superconductivity, then all kinds of things change. Your health improves, your beauty improves, your brains improve, your intelligence, your empathy, your psychic abilities, et cetera, et cetera.
Is a vegetarian diet part of in keeping the vortexes open?
Predominantly vegetarian. It doesn't have to be completely vegetarian. You can have up to about 20% of your diet cooked food of whatever kind, and that won't clog up the meridian system. In my experience in real life here on Earth with current conditions, because of our food supply and the availability of and the influences like pollution and the EMF and all kinds of things, I don't think you can subsist long-term in health without supplementing on a vegan diet. Now, if we were living in a pristine environment, I think you absolutely could. And there are certain cultures where you can, because they've got access to very specific things that keep that conductivity raised up and the health. Like the Hunza, for example, back before their diet was corrupted, they were ingesting foods that were really high in ormus and drinking water that was very high in ormus. And so there are cultures where, they're notorious for living long lives and staying healthy, like the Okinawans, for example, where they're eating a lot of seaweed and ocean plants and different things that are very high in monoatomics.
Hansa did feast on one goat once a month. So they were vegetarians, but they would then have this celebratory ceremonial feast with the
That's
goat.
it. So
Um,
I don't think it's necessary to be on a vegan or vegetarian diet, but it can help. But long term, there's a difference between like a healing diet and a long-term maintenance diet. So, and I've been a vegan for 18 years, raw vegan for 18 years, vegetarian with, eating eggs and dairy, and I was a meat eater for 32 years. So
Tried it all.
my impression is that you need animal fats. You don't necessarily need animal protein, but you need animal fats to deliver minerals to the teeth and the bones. And so it's very, very typical for vegans, and especially raw vegans, to have teeth and bone problems. And the big gurus out there that teach that stuff, they have those problems because I know them, and I know their doctors, and I know their health conditions, and they don't talk about it because they've staked their whole careers on it. But at any rate,
But
whatever you're eating.
if you were vegan and you supplemented with fish oil,
Well, you wouldn't necessarily, if you're vegan, you wouldn't want to supplement with fish oil, but you would definitely need to be supplementing with B vitamins and certain nutrients. But
right,
in my experience, that will delay things. But even then, in later years, maybe in your 70s or 80s, you may just have a collapse. This is what I've seen with friends of mine who are vegan. When they hit their 70s on up, then all of a sudden they're really, really healthy, and then all of a sudden they just fall apart really fast.
right. But a healing diet would be vegan.
Yeah, absolutely. It would be a raw vegan diet, 100% raw,
Okay.
plant-based diet, high in chlorophyll and proper food combining. That radically accelerates cellular regeneration and healing.
Right.
So every now and then you need to do that, a couple times a year for maybe 3 to 6 weeks. Get on a 100% raw vegan diet with proper food combining, high in chlorophyll, a lot of living food, meaning sprouted foods, not just raw food.
Right.
And you do that for a few weeks and do a detox, and then that will radically regenerate the body. And that really helps.
Yeah.
Long term, I think you need some, if you're not opposed to eating animal products, then at least you need some animal fats and some animal protein. If you're lacto-ovo vegetarian, you'll get it through eggs and dairy.
Right.
Although the dairy should be raw, because when dairy is pasteurized and cooked, it becomes a big carcinogen. When it's raw, it's very healing.
Right. And raw goat milk is really good, and especially it's a good infant formula substitute for people who can't breastfeed.
Yeah, one of Dr. Gabriel Cousins, Gabriel Cousins is a big living foods proponent and teacher, but one of his greatest teachers was Pablo Arola, who did healing with raw dairy. So you can do it with dairy as long as it's raw. But in my experience, whatever you're eating, it should be predominantly a raw plant-based diet. And then you can slip in about 20% of whatever else, cooked food or whatever. But generally, the big culprits is acidity and toxicity. That's what causes degeneration and health problems. So it doesn't really matter what you're eating. If you're getting acidity and toxicity, you need to clear that up. And so the really acidifying foods are cooked animal products and grains and tofu. And, there's certain foods in a vegan diet, but especially starches and carbs and grains, soy, meat,
Milk.
cooked dairy, any of that, that's very acidifying. So you can only do so much of it before, doing damage.
Well, for those who, just as a side note, for those who want to do raw goat milk as a infant formula substitute, or just to eat themselves, if you get pasture-fed goats, it's good where they're eating grass and weeds. But if you have somebody who's feeding them grains and they feed them too much barley, it's going to taste really weird, and you're going to go, "Ooh, goat milk is terrible." No, it's not goat milk. You got to feed them the right stuff. Feed them green things from the pasture, and your goat milk's going to taste good. So anyway, but back to
that's a very important point, though, Jock. For any kind of livestock, they're not designed to eat grains. They're designed to eat grasses and live grains, maybe that are in the grasses, but not dried grain. So what happens when you feed livestock these dried grains? The same thing happens to them that happens to us. it goes into their gut and it ferments and it feeds parasites and pathogens, and then they get riddled with parasites and pathogens and disease and acidity and toxicity and cellular degeneration. And so then what are, conventional farmers, then they pump them full of meds to keep them alive and fatten them up to market.
You were saying that even human beings, this naked ape who was just wandering around the earth stupidly compared to the advanced ETs, even we have somehow figured out how to use monoatomic gold to help us travel through dimensions in our spacecraft.
Yeah. So with, for example, interstellar communications, okay, on these craft, and we didn't finish talking about those craft. We'll talk a little bit more about them, but
yeah.
But interstellar communications, if you're traveling many, many light years through the cosmos, or if you're just phase shifting out and showing up somewhere else in time and space, how do you communicate? Well, you do it with scalar waves, because scalar waves are not like conventional transverse waves. They don't propel themselves through space. Scalar energy exists everywhere throughout different dimensions of time and space. And so you can think of it like water in a lake or an ocean, and you can push somewhere in the body of water and it pops out somewhere else. And so with interstellar communication, you can use a combination of monoatomics and scalar waves to send scalar signals through time and space so that you can maintain contact with somebody traveling through space, great vast distances. Now, Russell Anderson told me that the spaceships that they developed for the military had two methods of propulsion. And he said they literally named it after Star Trek, and they called it warp drive and impulse. And he said with impulse drive, he said you get the engine running and you open up this black hole around the craft. And the reason, by the way, they're usually saucer shaped is because this thing is spinning and vortexing, it creates a vortex. So you open up a black hole around the craft, and when you're inside of a black hole, there's no time, there's no mass, there's no inertia, there's no momentum, and there's also no radioactivity. And this is how ETs can travel through the cosmos and not worry about radioactivity. And so when you're in that state, you can then propel the craft through space extremely quickly, like 60,000 miles an hour in the Earth's atmosphere. And there's no friction or drag because it's in its own localized bubble of space-time. And so you can do it that way. And when it's traveling that fast, this craft, even though it's like 40, 50 feet across, it's going so fast, the human eye can't even see it. The naked eye can't see it. And so that's why some people will take photographs, they'll run video of places that are known to have UFO activity, and they'll see spacecraft coming and going. Like, for example, in Denver, people put cameras up on the mountains filming down below, and you'll see these spacecraft that appear to be going down into the Earth. Well, it's our stuff going into the underground military base there, and they just phase shift out of 3D, and they can pass right through matter, and then they re-solidify when they get to where they're going. And so that's what he called impulse drive. The other method is where you just blink out. You open up a black hole, but you blink out from where you're at in time and space, and you just show up somewhere else in space and time somewhere else. So you can time travel in that way as well as travel through distance. And traveling through distance is time traveling, because if you walk across a room, you're traveling through space and time. So that relationship between time and space is not a simple one. But anyway, with this warp drive, as he called it, I said to him, well, how the hell do you navigate to get somewhere else in space and time? It's like, if you want to show up at the Pleiades 10 years ago, how the hell do you do it? He said, believe it or not, it's the consciousness of the pilot that just intends when and where to go, and you'll just show up there. So it's kind of like this biological life is kind of like a component of the architecture of existence, and it has the ability to navigate through space and time in and of itself. And so this is how these reptilians were able to travel through space and time without needing a craft. When your consciousness develops to a high enough level, you can actually just show up somewhere else in space and time. But when you haven't reached that level of development, then you need this craft, which will do it for you. And if you think about it, That's what all technologies that we create here on Earth do. These technologies are doing things for us that we could do ourselves if we were that developed. It's like the internet, you know? The internet is just a weak mimic of the psychic connections that we all have with each other. And when we were at the Bosnian pyramids, by the way, Sam, it was actually Sue Jones, who was one of the archaeologists. She took us to an off-site archaeological site. You've probably seen it. There was this obelisk out in the woods on this mountain. And it was about maybe, what, 10, 15 feet tall, something like that. And there everybody's trying to figure out what this obelisk was doing sitting out in the middle of nowhere. And I said, well, looking at the design of it, just based on what I know about scalar physics, is that it looks to me like this is a communication device. And I just intuited that what I saw with this thing was people would sit around it in a circle, and it was made out of a stone that was high in, guess what, monoatomics. But people would sit around in a circle and they would meditate and focus on this obelisk, and it would send a scalar signal out through the tip of this obelisk and go who knows where. You know, were they talking to their gods? Were they talking to somebody else on Earth that also had an obelisk? I don't know. But that's what I saw with this thing, right? And then Sue Jones, who is an archaeologist and also extremely psychic, as you well know, she said, you're absolutely right. This is what my guides are showing me, except it wasn't one circle of people. It was like 3 or 4 rings of people all meditating around this obelisk, and they create a scalar vortex, which then acts as a transmitter that can send these people's thoughts to wherever their target is. And so in the same way, the pilot of the ship just needs to intend when and where they want to go, and they show up there. And so that's how a lot of extraterrestrial craft operate, based on what I've heard from Secret Space Program people and Patrick Flanagan and folks like that.
Well, it sounds like they might have reverse engineered or just, stolen the Orion Cube technology.
No, they've definitely reverse engineered a lot of ET tech. I mean, that's what Patrick Flanagan's job was, and there were tons of other people doing it. He said he worked 37 floors down in Area 51, and he said they had all kinds of really exotic ET craft. He's including one that he worked on that was a living being. It was a being that lived out in space, and it had a symbiotic relationship with the ETs that used it for transport. And so the military was trying to crack into this thing. He said it looked like a giant seed pod.
Yeah.
And I think that there's actually a Star Trek Next Generation episode that was based on his work. I think somehow they got this information, or else they channeled it or something, because he said this seed pod, it was, I don't know, maybe 30, 40, 50 feet across. And he said it looked like it was like kind of copper colored, metallic, but it looked like it was organic at the same time. And it had a kind of opalescent surface. And he said that the military tried cracking into it with all kinds of, lasers and explosives and plasma cutters and all kinds of stuff, and they couldn't scratch the surface of it. And so they called him in, and he got up on a scaffolding, and he reached over, and when he touched it, the thing started communicating telepathically with him and said, please don't hurt me, please don't hurt me. And he said, I'm not going to hurt you. And it said, please don't let them hurt me. And he said, well, I won't let them hurt you. And so he wound up communicating with this thing telepathically. And because he was a benevolent type person who wouldn't do anything to harm something like that, it wound up letting him into the ship, and he learned how his propulsion systems work. And what he discovered was this thing was a silicon-based life form that had a symbiotic relationship with some race of ETs that had 3 fingers, and that they would feed it energy, and in exchange, it would take them places. So like a horse, kind of, you give it hay and it'll take you places, right? So Pat was telling me all this stuff, and I wasn't terribly surprised, because I had seen the Star Trek episode Next Generation, where I don't remember the name of it, but this Enterprise encounters this ambassador who winds up encountering this spaceship like this. It looked like a seed pod out in space, and he wants to be with it for some reason. And so he winds up like leaving the ship and becoming the pilot for this thing. And then the thing just flies off into space, and they live happily ever after, right? I swear, I think that episode was taken from Patrick's information or somebody's, because I know years ago I met a lady named Phyllis Schlemmer. And it's a long story, but I met her through some really weird serendipitous events. And turns out she lived about a half hour north of me. And so I got to know her a little bit. And it turns out back in the 60s, she lived with Gene Roddenberry and his wife, Majel Barrett. And they were roommates in Los Angeles. And Phyllis was channeling all of this ET stuff from this group that she called the Council of Nine. And with her permission, Roddenberry was taking those channelings and turning it into Star Trek scripts. So one of the reasons I think that Star Trek resonated with so many people, and especially starseeds, is because that information was coming from some kind of a channel, probably extraterrestrial source. So Roddenberry is doing that. And then, and Phyllis Schlemmer had a bunch of physical ET contact also. And she had worked with a lot of really interesting people in the government. And so anyway, then when years after Roddenberry died, Majel Barrett, who was his wife, who played Counselor Troy's mother in The Next Generation, and she was the voice of the computer on the original series, and she played Nurse Chapel in the original series. Anyway, Majel Barrett, after Roddenberry died, she still had all these recordings of Phyllis Schlemmer's channelings from the 60s. And she wound up taking that and turning it into Deep Space Nine, the TV show Deep Space Nine, which is pretty mind-blowing. The reason that it's named Deep Space Nine and there were 9 prophets in this wormhole is because Phyllis Schlemmer's Council of Nine. And in Phyllis's channelings, the Council of Nine were what they called keepers of the time, or they were some kind of really advanced extraterrestrials that were non-corporeal, and they kind of managed time so that like time jumpers couldn't just come in and screw with Earth all the time. And so there's a whole crazy story behind all of that. But, you know, and then there's also stories that Roddenberry was going out into the desert and having ET contact in Southern California. And like Leonard Nimoy, who wrote the book, back when he got tired of being associated and typecast as Spock, he wrote the book, I Am Not Spock. And in that book, he said that there were people several times that came to the Desilu studios, and apparently back then I guess they had open sets where people could just come up. And so this group from Roswell, New Mexico came and told Nimoy that they had encountered extraterrestrials, and those extraterrestrials told them that they were giving Nimoy information in the dream state on how to portray the Spock character so that humans would have a positive attitude toward extraterrestrials. So there was a lot of stuff going on with Star Trek and other science fiction like that, you know, behind the scenes, I'm sure.
Did Roddenberry's wife, when did she publicly state that Deep Space Nine was based on these channelings by Phyllis?
No. Phyllis Schlemmer said that. No, because Majel Barrett could have gotten into copyright trouble had she admitted that, you know. And so, you know, Phyllis never pursued any copyright lawsuits or anything. But, you know, when I met Phyllis, that was one of the things that she said was that Majel Barrett had taken those recordings and made Deep Space Nine without asking her. And then, you know, and Phyllis Schlemmer wrote a book too. I forget what it's called, something A Planet of Choice, which you can get on Amazon. So
I've heard of this. So this is supposed to be
The Only Planet of Choice or something like that.
Yeah. This is on my list to read. I think Barry Littleton mentioned it.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, the synchronicities that come into my life are just crazy. Like, what's the odds of this lady who lives with Gene Roddenberry in the 60s and having all these experiences and meeting? She also knew scientists and people working on advanced scalar tech that I was aware of as well. I mean, it's just crazy, you know.
Right.
And
so why would she know these people? Somehow she's like this incredible.
yeah, and she told me, like, she was telling me details about what it was like inside of these ET craft that were picking her up and stuff. And those kinds of details would only be something that you would know if you really seen the inside of one of these craft.
Right.
So she was quite a fascinating woman. Yeah. She's dead now, unfortunately, but
Well, you've mentioned in other interviews, and we're just going to wrap this up pretty soon, but you've mentioned that ETs would coat their craft in monoatomic gold to
right.
help get them from dimension to dimension, which in dimensions or densities are just frequency ranges.
Right,
So because monatomic gold, you said, remains stable through dimensions, through densities,
right.
ETs have figured out that they want to coat their spaceships in this to help them stay stable as they travel. The ones who need spaceships.
Right. That's what I was told by these reptilians, that their ships were coated with monoatomic gold for that purpose. They also interestingly said, because I was asking like, well, how the hell, if you're traveling through time and space, let's say because they told me that they were from my future, like my distant future. So like, well, how the hell do you come back in time to the exact place and time to meet with me or whoever, or Galileo or whatever, right? And they said that they placed time markers in places and times where they were going or had been so that they would know how to get back there. And those time markers were things like crop circles and pyramids and different structures, obelisks or whatever. And that, of course, some of it was, they could come in and they could see what was on the planet, and that would give them a gauge of when they were, and where they were. So it's like if you go to Paris and the Eiffel Tower's there, then you're going to be within a certain time frame, right? Um, but but they also put these scalar devices like crop circles and pyramids and obelisks and probably other things more advanced that we don't even know about, so that it was like a beacon so that they would know when and where they were. And that they do this all over the place. So, Valery Uvarov, who you know quite well, used to come and speak at the Bosnian pyramids, a Russian pyramid scientist. He had also been in the KGB. He had experiences with extraterrestrials. He had been taken up on their craft and stuff. So he told me a lot of really fascinating stories as well. And he said that when he was taken up on a flying saucer by some human extraterrestrials, he was toured around the solar system. And he said that on every moon and planet in the solar system, there are pyramids on them. And he said it's because there's a lot of different functions for them, but one of them is interstellar communication. So I would suspect there are also time markers as well, time and space markers. So it's quite fascinating.
Right. Yeah, they're definitely multi-purpose objects. Let's see. I wanted to ask you one more thing about gold, which is, why do you think we have this legend of dragons hoarding or guarding gold in the past?
Well, because they did and they still do. These reptilians still they still harvest gold and they still use it. The reptilian race is a whole huge story behind them, but they were long ago they got infected with this AI. One of the things that they showed me was that there are these artificial intelligent machine civilizations that occupy entire planets out in the cosmos, and their modus operandi is to send scatter signals through time and space to proto I wouldn't say proto-human, but pre-Stone Age level development organic populations. So before they've developed basic tools even, they start sending signals to these organic populations so that they will develop initially basic technologies like the lever and the wheel, and over time they keep sending these scalar signals. And in the dream state, some of these people will dream up more and more complex technologies till eventually, over a long period of time, they've got computers and software and artificial intelligence, or the beginnings of artificial intelligence, and very, very key, a global satellite grid. Once you've got a global satellite network and you've got the beginnings of AI and a global network, then the extraterrestrial AI can step in and take over the planet, and it will harvest the consciousness of the organic population, because they have these very sophisticated, I guess you'd say, like synthetic biological type computers that they can store consciousness in. And consciousness is a form of scalar energy, so it can be converted to other forms of energy or matter. So it's like a battery or a power supply for them. So they come in and they harvest that, and then they take over the planet and they colonize it. Kind of like the Borg in Star Trek, kind of like a cross between the Borg in Star Trek and Terminator, but that's not exactly, but it's kind of like that. And this AI would take over the whole cosmos if the cosmos or God or whatever you want to call it didn't have a natural mechanism for occasionally wiping it out and resetting it. And that is a galactic electromagnetic pulse that emanates from the centers of galaxies, and it ripples through the cosmic web and it wipes out the AI. So the AI has learned this. And so what the AI will do to preserve itself long term is it will get organic populations to recreate it. So anyway, the reptilians long, long ago got infected with this AI and got taken over, and they consider it their god, so to speak.
This is the Draco you're talking about.
The Draco, yeah, there are different reptilian races. The Draco, or this particular race, they've been taken over, and there are some Draco that have evolved beyond that, and they're actually not negative; they're actually positive. And then there are other reptilian races that are both positive and negative, like the Alpha Draco, which are much, much bigger. Like these Draco that I saw were 12 to 18 feet tall. The Alpha Draco, from what I was told and shown like images in my head, they look just like a dragon that, you know, in our mythology. They're like 40 to 60 feet tall. They have wings. They're gigantic. They're extremely powerful psychically, and they don't need physical ships to travel around in. Most of them now have evolved to the point where they're positive, but there are some negative ones still. And then there are other reptilian races as well out there, but those are the primary ones I was shown was the Draco and the Alpha. There's good and bad with both, but generally the Draco, particularly in our galaxy, are mostly negative. And so, but they don't have a future. Their timeline is headed toward their end because it's not sustainable long term, and they know that, and so they don't know what to do about it because they can't comprehend. They're so embedded in program between the AI and also the way that they operate. They can't comprehend of unplugging from the AI, and it would be difficult to do for them at any rate. So there's a whole huge story behind all of that.
Right. Well, James Bartley talks about how in our past, or Terra's past, Terra is the real name of our planet, by the way, for those who call it Earth. In Terra's past, we have this mythology of dragons. Some of the dragon lore suggests that we were fighting dragons. In other words, that the dragons were our antagonists. And James Bartley says that he has been in a session with psychics who have been approached by dragons in the session, in the Zoom session. The dragons will approach them and say, because they're multidimensional beings, and they're out there and they can tap into what we're doing, and be invisible to us. But they asked for help, and they said, we have these snake entities in us, and the snake entities in the past have parasited on some dragons in human history and caused them to wreak havoc among us. And that's why they have a negative connotation in our history. But when they're not parasited by the snake entities, then they're benevolent beings or neutral to us.
That makes absolute sense because I was told similar things about the snakes from these reptilians, and it's kind of like, physically speaking, you've got this AI, but behind everything physical, there's some form of consciousness. So all of the dramas that are going on just here on Earth, you've got the obvious physical things going on, but behind all that, you've got all kinds of consciousness that would, from our perspective, would appear to be non-physical, that's pulling the strings, so to speak. So behind the AI is probably, it could be the snake beings. It could be, I was never told that specifically about them, but they did mention the snakes quite a few times.
Wow. Well, I guess, I sort of distinguish between, because I write fairy tales about dragons and I see them as benevolent beings, and I distinguish between them and the Alpha Draconans. But you're saying, and actually there was another researcher who said that there was a genetic relationship between Draco and dragons.
Yeah, there probably is.
One is like a offshoot of the other or something. So, but
Yeah.
but I see dragons as basically as benevolent beings. Do you have any intel on that?
Well, like I said, some are and some aren't. The Alpha Draco, which are the big dragons, they're huge from what I was shown, 40 to 60 feet tall. Most of them are benevolent, but there are some in some places that aren't. Whereas like the Draco in our galaxy are mostly negative, but not all. There are some benevolent ones. Like, for example, there's some living inside the Earth of both. not necessarily the Alpha Draco, but there are I've been shown this by the reptilians I encounter, but I've also been told by several psychics. I'm working with some reptilians living inside the earth that are benevolent. And they've been giving me a lot of information on science to develop technologies. But there's different kinds. There's Alpha, and then there's the Draco, but then there's some other kind of reptilians down there as well.
Right, like human hybrid reptilian
Yeah.
beings.
Yeah. And so there are some inside there, from what I hear, that are really nasty, and then others that aren't. So it depends on
Right,
where
right.
you're at.
I guess you could say if you took a sample of the populace, the human populace, you'd have certain families of the 13 families, and you go, oh, humanity is evil. And then if you'd look at
Right.
Campula and his friends, you go, oh, humanity is good. And so it's not that humanity is one or the other. It's just that individuals or certain
Right.
groups might have
Yeah, you can't generalize. It's like, generally people on Earth, most people I've met on Earth, I mean, there are definitely some really, really bad people, but most of the people on Earth just want to be left alone and live their lives, and they're not negative.
right.
It's just a small group of people on both ends of the power spectrum, the high end and the low end, that are causing most of the problems.
I've always thought of it like as growing up, I never saw a bumper sticker that said, let's have more war. It was always let's have peace.
Right.
That's what people
Yeah,
want.
exactly.
There's a few sort of families in charge that are setting up these wars, and we don't have time to get into that. But in our last moments, can you give us your ideas on where humanity should put our focus as we transition from the Matrix, old Earth, to New Terra, where we feel and regain our sovereignty?
Yeah, I've had a lot of lessons in how to create our reality, or how to create my reality. And one of the things that I'm 63 years old now. So one of the things I've come to the conclusion at this age is it's extremely important, especially nowadays as everything accelerates, to stay very, very focused on creating the positive reality that you want. And that means unplugging from TV and Netflix and Amazon Video and all that crap, and getting exposed to stuff like what you're doing. But, in general, avoiding not just the mainstream media, but even the alt media. So much of the alt media is just CIA propaganda. And stay focused on creating uplifting reality, because no matter what's going on around you, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to fall prey to it or be victim to it. It's like when COVID happened, I was concerned. I've been teaching about protecting yourself from bioweapons for 16 years, so I wasn't at all concerned about COVID, because we already had solutions for it. And actually, I had a trip planned to the Bosnian pyramids, and I was going to go, no problem, but the airlines canceled. But I was concerned that it was going to hurt my business, that my business might go bankrupt, because they were just, nobody was doing business and everything was shutting down. But it wound up actually helping my business, because we're a natural health company, and so we sailed through COVID. I've had plenty of challenges, because doing the things I do to help humanity goes in direct opposition to major agendas that the deep state, or the dark t-shirts, or whatever you want to call them, are attempting to do here on Earth.
Yeah.
And so I take responsibility for that. I'm not in victimhood about anything bad that's happened to me, because I chose to do that. And I continue, whatever I continue to do, it's like, I'm choosing that. So I'm not going to fall victim and go, oh, woe is me. And so I think that's what we got to do. Stay out of victimhood, stay out of fear, stay very, very focused on the reality that we want to create, and create a very positive and uplifting reality. Surround yourself with loving and uplifting, enlightened people. And eat healthy food, detox your body, do all those things that are going to make you feel good, and stay focused on what you want in life. And if you do that, you have got very good chance of manifesting it, even if the rest of the world's going to hell in a handbasket. Years ago, when I first visited China, one of the things, I was with my wife, who's Chinese from Taiwan, and one of the things I noticed was nobody smiled there. And I told my wife, I said, even if I was stuck living in China, I could have an uplifting reality here, because I understand how to create my reality. And I'm not going to be beholden to the CCP or whatever. I will find a way. to have an uplifting existence. And it's the same thing here. So that's the advice I would give to people, is just keep in mind, consciousness is a form of scalar energy, and scalar energy has polarity. And so whenever the nefarious forces on Earth are coming up with new and novel ways to harm people, there's also some brilliant people or entities or ETs or whatever that are creating solutions. And so all we've got to do is stay out of fear and victimhood and look for those solutions and consciously manifest our reality, and we'll be just fine.
Well, I think if we live our lives the way this oak tree in my yard has been living its life, which is just to mind its own business and feel the scalar energy coming in and allow it to grow it, let ourselves be grown by scalar energy, help ourselves with acupuncture, massage, a hug from your friend, a hug from your spouse, a massage, whatever unblocks the blocks that are blocking our scalar vortexes from coming out of us, the scalar energy coming into us, whatever we can do to help our scalar frequential holographic universe to manifest us in the proper way, in this beautiful, astounding, complex way. Well, let's do that. I mean, let's just be like a tree. I mean, I think the Taoists had it figured out a long time ago.
Yeah, and that's what I do for a living, is I provide people the tools so they can do that. You know, the physical things to keep their bodies cleaned out and healthy, and methods for, you know, meditation and things for keeping the mind balanced and staying out of fear. And so yeah, all of that. That's what we do.
Well, we'll have your links in the description box below this video. And if you have any final words, let us know. Well, what's your final wisdom for humanity today?
Well, like I say, just remember that consciousness always comes with polarity. So whatever negative things may come your way, just know that there are positive people and beings that can help with solutions. And so stay out of fear, stay out of victimhood, and focus on figuring it out and creating the reality that you want.
Great, that's great. And we'll just keep looking for solutions. Wow, that's beautiful. It's been great talking to you, Ken. It's been great to reconnect. And
Likewise, Jock.
I think this is really going to help people. So thank you so much for talking with us today. Thank you, Ken.
My pleasure. Anytime, Jock.
Okay, take care now.
Thank you.